Welcome, welcome. Go ahead and get comfortable, settle in, and we will together invoke 2024. So if you don't have a pen and something to write with, I recommend you get that now. And other than that, just get comfortable. Once you have that at your disposal, go ahead and we'll sit up. And we're going to start with just take a few moments just to tune in together and prepare ourselves for this journey of preparing perhaps a new adventure, a new journey forward for the time ahead. So why don't we just start with just a few moments of tuning in. I'll ask you to go ahead and sit tall, and if you're using a chair, to go ahead and sit in such a way that your lower back is against it and that your spine is upright. Yeah, go ahead and settle in. And let's take a moment. We'll close our eyes. So with your eyes closed, just first thing, in the very beginning, just become aware of the space that your body occupies, noticing the uniqueness of this moment. Becoming conscious, becoming aware of the unique setting you're in. Your perception of the atmosphere around you. If you're noticing or observing that there's sound or lack of sound, perhaps there's a distinct feeling in the room that you're occupying right now. A room you might be very familiar with, and yet if we become attentive, this moment, this experience, this opportunity to become aware of the space allows it to become a completely new experience. And now I'm going to ask you to bring your attention inward, interoception. So you bring your attention to the interior space, so really from the skin inward, become aware of sensation. Noticing the unique qualities of the body at this moment. Is there a dullness? Is there an alertness? Is there an overly activated state? And finally, bring perception to the field of the mind. So now perception is objectifying mind itself. Is the mind focused? Or perhaps dispersed and distracted? Is there a dullness or an aspirational quality, perhaps, that you bring to this moment? Anticipatory? Or perhaps you bring a mood, a feeling that now, as we begin to slow down and settle, we become more conscious of, but that in fact we become aware, we recognize, is in the background of all of those other fields of experience. A mood is in the background of the way we experience the world, the way we see or feel our body, the way we think. Now you take a few moments to recognize the witness, the one who has the capacity to observe the field that is always changing, Prakriti, from the one to the many. So the many, the endless fields of becoming. That which is of the field of being, unchanging, always conscious. As though now you recover, you reestablish yourself in the seat of witness, higher mind. Begin to consciously deepen your breath. Inhaling and exhaling smoothly, evenly. And allow the breath to begin to reach the intelligence, to activate and stir the intelligence in the body. As though you begin to feel or sense or perceive, even see, the cells coming alive, the cells even in the soles of the feet, ankles, calves, knees, thighs, all the way up to the crown of the head, even the arms and fingertips and palms. As you deepen your breath is becoming activated, animated. Now, even the space around you is enlivened. Please breathe in deeply, breathe out. I'm going to chant Om 3 times. You're welcome to join me. Take a deep inhalation, please. And now, just briefly, I'm going to chant a mantra. It's a mantra to invoke, to stir the forces that allow us to subsume our confusion, to dissolve confusion, and set the way to clear and spontaneous unfoldment of intuition, of inner guidance, of strength, of clarity. Dveta dvetaha mahamoha sharbarikshapanakshamaha paswaniva jayate kogeneshodutariutaha pratibha prolaso nishakara ivaparaha dutiyuktaha sajayatu patakastavanvitaha. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Peace for 2024 and beyond. Okay, so welcome. So this is not my usual office. We planned for this event, this opportunity to celebrate this incoming of 2024 quite some time ago. And then things started to, well, really, I felt the need to come see my mom. And so to come to Los Angeles, and this is where I am right now. And what was also not planned is that I wouldn't go to sleep, that I had a beautiful, sober, wonderful New Year's with some amazing people. I'm thankful to them, and we had an opportunity as a collective to share our thoughts and intentions and poems, and it's really, in a sense, kind of an example, and I feel privileged to have had part in it of just how human beings we can support each other and help bring forward the best in each other, and the kindness and the thoughtfulness and an expanded vision of what is possible. I personally read a poem from Hafiz that's a favorite of mine. So, I don't know, it's 3 in the morning. You're seeing this. It's supposed to be, it's going to be live streamed in about a few hours. But just so happened. Anyway, so if I come off a little delirious, now you know why. But I have a plan, I have a meditation. So we have a conversation. We'll begin with conversation. Okay? Done a lot of mantras to get ready for this, so I think we're going to be fine. I've taught this for so many years, probably 30 years or so, almost every New Year's. I've created this opportunity, or really thought that I wanted to provide this opportunity where we could welcome the new year consciously. And at various, stages in those, over the course of those 30 years, the nature of the conversation has changed and evolved, one would hope. And then some things have stayed the same. So first, let's just talk just a little bit. Let's create a larger context, because so much of this idea of coming together at this time of New Year's, it winds up being very much about, okay, forward-looking, resolve, and then maybe we use some tantric methodology, some way of visualization and imparting visualization in a particularly significant way, which, by the way, I'm going to do tonight as well, or this morning, whatever the case may be. But it also is an opportunity to think a little bit. And so one of the first things I want to just point out is one of the things that was evident, it may have been evident in the meditation I just led briefly. Let's be very clear that there's effectively, and I know I hesitate to sound too dualistic for those who are more partial to non-dualism, and in the end I'm more partial to non-dualism as well, and if that doesn't even register what's the difference between dualism and non-dualism, don't worry about it. The point is that a part of us is already who and what we wish we were. That really the nature of resolution is to direct our attention to the part of us that is always in a state of becoming. At this moment, you might be becoming more interested or more bored, you might be getting restless, you might be getting inspired. And through this conversation, you will be in a state of becoming. You will be changing, hopefully for the better. And that you will, I hold your interest and I hold your attention long enough that we together cover what are the essential things I want to provide for you in this New Year's, in this outline I've prepared. So there's a part of us, as I described, that is always becoming, forever in a state of change. And ideally, we are changing for the better, right? It isn't necessarily the case, but that's what we hope for. But there's a part of us that is unchanging. And clearly, that part of us that's unchanging, as outlined by tradition and tradition and tradition, and over and over and over again, is we hear this idea, be ye perfect as thy Father in heaven is perfect, or we go to the Christian tradition, or we go to Judaism or Buddhism, this idea of ground luminosity, that there is a light within us that lights everything in this universe, that perception itself comes from the self. And it's that is unchanging. In effect, what the spiritual practices that I teach, that you practice, are in a way to line up, in effect, to line up this part of us that is changing with the part of us that is unchanging, such that we are guided and directed by the very best in ourselves to move toward the fulfillment, the full flowering of that part of us that is ever becoming. In a way, there is a part of us that's a full, complete flower, and there's a part of us that is in the process of blossoming or blooming or has the possibility of blooming. So when we make a resolution, what we're doing is bringing our attention to this process of potentially always blossoming and bringing out, activating the beauty and the possibility of our best self. So we should understand that all the work that we'll do together today, all your spiritual practice, all your resolution, all the follow-up to what we'll cover tonight is really directed to this part of us that is becoming, changing. And the principle, one of the main principles of the yoga tradition is that while we live in a world of change, we have the possibility of affecting the direction of change toward that which is helpful and beneficial and serves something greater than ourselves, or in a different direction. And of course, a lot of you know that distinction. We can sum it up with two words: dharma and adharma. So what serves the greater good, what serves intelligence, and that's what we're after, because part of you already has that seed of pure intelligence. So let's be clear. So there's two parts, and we're working on part A, the becoming part. There's a tendency on January 1st of a given year, as we switch the calendar, to look forward. And part of the work I'm going to invite you into today is based on the notion that we can't really move forward until we really, truly accept the past and acknowledge the past, acknowledge the patterns even of the past. And that's kind of going to be the center of our work. There'll be more, but part of it is that. And what I would offer, and some of you who've studied with me over the last couple of years may have heard me say this before, but the end game in Tantra or Yoga or Vedanta, the end game of non-dualism, if you will, where we're immersed in being, is not transcendence. It's acceptance. There's nothing that we're ultimately trying to move away from as much as accepting the totality of all that is, the light and the shadow, if you will, about us and about the world. So the effort that it requires of us to try and partition the good from the bad means, one, that we'll be really busy, and two, it will mean that we have to cut or push away, separate ourselves from a huge part of existence, because there is plenty of dark. And so what I'm going to offer here is a sense of the full acceptance of ourselves as the way forward. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to frame it now, and we're going to do work on it. And the idea here is, if we look back, in fact, let's do it, because this is in my notes. Let's just do it together. Let's take a moment. Let's close our eyes. Let's just close our eyes and sit tall. And now we sit. We've passed the threshold into a new year. With our eyes closed, just begin to sense what was 2023. And with your eyes closed, begin to reflect on its many colors. No doubt there was challenges, both your own as well as worldly. Many of those challenges many of them may still be in place. And at the same time, there were moments of breaking through, of understanding, of possibility, of remembering, of honoring or tasting the preciousness of life and love, hope, and aspiration. And there's such a multitude of experiences, any one of which we could focus upon and experience 2023 utterly differently depending on what moment we focused on. Please open your eyes and come back when you're ready. Here's the thing I want to begin with. This is the beginning of your reflective work as we build to this meditation. And I haven't taught this meditation in many, many years. I'm going to adapt a meditation that I taught long ago that I got from my teacher more than 4 decades ago. I think it's time we pull it out. I think it's really worthwhile. So, in short, in doing the work of accepting the totality of who we are, I want to just simply acknowledge something on a very practical level, which is I've never seen any mention of anything as it relates to the spiritual journey that suggests we will not make mistakes, that we didn't necessarily live as fully, we didn't make the best choice for ourselves or serving the greater good every moment of that year that just passed. There's no suggestion that we as human beings are perfect, that we don't make decisions that are less than ideal. Okay? But what there is, we'll say, the kind of alarm that's put on that asks us to bring attention to is repetitive action. And it's a Sanskrit word, but it's used in Buddhism quite a bit. It's samsara. So this is the wheel of repetitive action and the karmic or the outpouring or the effect of those repetitive actions. So what it does do, what these traditions do speak to, is repetitive action. So here's what I'll ask you to do now, and I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. So in essence, we'll do it with our eyes closed, but in essence, what I'm going to ask you to do is isolate the lesson that you no longer want to repeat, just fundamentally. And I've used this fundamental question in various teachings, particularly in the 4 desires. And then since then, say in the Yoga Nidra training we do. But the point is, what's the lesson you're done with, you wish to be done with? Because this teaching today will do is an opportunity to be done with it. Okay, so please close your eyes. Take 3 slow, deep breaths. As you're breathing deeply this way, have the intention that your attention becomes more present moment aware. Clear your mind of the past. Pause your tendency to move to the future. You return to present moment awareness. Now relax. Sense the year 2023 as a totality. It's not necessarily all of the events, the circumstances, all of those things beyond your control that I want you to consider now. But if you could pour the contents of 2023 in a glass that related specifically to how you showed up for it, the choices you made throughout the year, the tone and the feeling you brought to the year, and you just simply pour the choices into a glass that now you can see for yourself. The contents of that glass as it relates to the feelings you brought, the choices you made. Now, if you could select a single pattern that you would like to walk away from, that your resolve is now to recognize the patterns of the past and find the one that if you could step away from, step out of, you would be freer to be your best self. What would it be? Okay, so I want you to identify it. And when you're ready, you'll open your eyes and simply write down the pattern you wish to walk away from. Not necessarily the circumstances. You may or may not be able to do that, but the pattern you bring to your circumstances, the way you treat yourself or others. What is that pattern that you're ready to walk away from? Okay, please write it down. Serious business, this 2024. And this is where it begins. If we're going to move forward, we have to examine and accept and recognize the past. So I'm hoping you're writing it down or it'd be written down by now. This may be something that you've talked with, a therapist, someone you trust, a friend, something that's really been kind of filling your sense of your self-identity and just waiting to come out. This is a time to express it. Okay, so I'm assuming you've done it. If not, you can conceivably stop the stream and do that because this is an essential step. So here's the thing, guys. Our Gregorian calendar is one, not the most accurate, and two, it's one of 40 existing calendars in the world right now. There's a Persian calendar, a Jewish calendar, a Chinese calendar. And so 2024 is kind of an arbitrary choice. Midnight, wherever you were, was arbitrary. One of 40 versions of time. Now here's the interesting thing though. We choose to make this moment auspicious. You're here because it's auspicious, or I gave it to you free. We come together in this collective intention to do something meaningful for ourselves and perhaps, in essence, to support one another in this process of change. But we're doing it in what is conceivably an arbitrary time from viewed objectively. But the reality is it's sacred because we've determined it's sacred. We've determined it's sacred, and we've determined that there's an opportunity in this moment to change. And here's the thing. If we only make that determination for an hour once a year, it's not going to have a lot of effect. What's going to happen for this possibility of changing, for us to actually be different, is that we will have to make a lot of inflection points. We'll have to create them. You know, this is perhaps why there's a ritual of going to church on Sundays or the Sabbath. Again, it's based on unique calendars, but calendars aren't absolute. They're based on a certain transition of the stars, planets, but different traditions see it differently. But the point is, the moment we create that intention of sacredness, that intention of opportunity in which we elevate ourselves, lo and behold, there is opportunity, which means that we're going to have to do it consistently. In short, if you want to change, you need to change something you do every day. But I will add to that. So we all have a thing we want to walk away from. So here's the thing. I'm not going to talk a lot longer. I want to get to this meditation, but I want you to have the food, the resources to make the meditation meaningful. So if it's not clear, let me try and say what I was saying a little more briefly with a little bit more specificity to it. Choose this resolution consistently particularly over the next 40 to 60 days. And that's when it starts getting interesting. And moreover, I'm not only asking you to recognize the pattern in you wish to change. By the way, I'm doing this work and I'm super committed to the next 40 days, again, to do the work that I'm suggesting. But moreover, let's kind of let's get into the weeds on this. And that is that not only do we want to change, we have the identity, we have identified what it is we're targeting, which is the pattern we're walking away from, not necessarily our circumstantial changes, but really how do I treat myself? How do I treat the circumstances? How do I see them? That's the pattern I'm changing. That's the inflection point where I separate myself from the samsara, repetitive action. But now we want to identify something that we do that's tied to the pattern we wish to change, something that we think that's tied to the pattern we wish to change, and something that we feel tied to the pattern that we wish to change. This interruption, if I may, starts to sound like a lot of work and discipline. At first glance, in some ways it is. But I want to suggest that this is the exercise of self-love, self-care, if you will. Self-love is probably a more meaningful way to think about it, self-care. Self-love carries more weight. So imagine now, there's one thing that you do that supports or sustains or propagates the pattern you wish to change. There's probably more than one thing that you do, but I want you to identify what that one thing is. I then want you to identify the specific thought that is the corollary or the thought expression of that pattern that you wish to change. Remember samsara. We want to break free of the repetitive pattern. Because really, not long after this live stream ends, you're not that different. Even though this meditation is one of the more powerful ones and I've adapted it so it's a little more accessible, notwithstanding that, we're not that different. And we're only different to the extent that we hold on to the sacredness or that we revisit this intentionality. And then finally, there's a feeling above that we need to also step away from. So this is a kind of, I'm borrowing from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which talks about these three fields as being necessary, how one influences the other, etc. But by doing so, we create this global possibility of creating a shift. And if we are capable of changing consciously, by the way, CBT has been shown to be incredibly effective at so many different things. So this isn't just theory, this is really the practice, but that we address something at the level of action, something at the level of thought, and something at the level of emotion or feeling. And so I'm not asking you to look for the positive yet. I'm asking you to simply identify one thing in each element or each aspect, action, thought, and feeling. And now to go ahead and take a moment. And let's do it together. We're going to close our eyes. And we're going to identify them. So just take a moment, close your eyes. So just take a few seconds now, initially, just to feel back into the repetitive pattern that you've determined you wish to walk away from. You wish to be freed of. One of the most profound teachings of the yoga tradition is the concept of kaivalya. Kaivalya literally means aloneness. It means to rest in your essential self, unconditioned. So right now we're identifying the conditioning that confines your essential self, that keeps it spinning in a cycle of repetitive lessons. So now just take a few moments to feel into it, to sense it or to see it. And then we'll allow the contemplation to deepen by giving you some time to identify an action that's associated to that pattern you intend to walk away from. What's the action? It can be super simple. Listen, until 20 years ago, no one had to say social media. If you say social media, it's a universal issue. It's universal, it's global. But I'm not suggesting that's the only option. Something you do, one thing. That you are prepared to change, to either abandon completely or significantly restrain the pattern, to diminish it. For the simple reason that you identify it as being connected to a pattern that's not constructive. Now identify a thought, a sentence or two sentences. We can think of this as some form of self-criticism, some cognitive patterning. There's a meaningful understanding that neurologists have described, which is that Human beings think about 80,000 thoughts a day. Less than 10%, far less than 10%, are actually new. We repeat thought, tens of thousands of thoughts every day. And so many of them are the same. So if you could just sum it up with one or two sentences that you're unwilling to continue to perpetuate, with the recognition that doing so is the epitome of self-care, self-love, self-compassion. And then finally, and this is sometimes the hardest, is the feeling. Are you prepared to recognize the feeling as a foreigner? A kind of pathology, a virus, a bug, a bacteria that stains the heart. And awareness is your inoculation, the boost to your psychic immune system. So I'm going to give it a moment, one more minute or so with your eyes closed. If you missed one of those things, you don't have an answer yet, just reflect on it. Something you do you're prepared to limit, if not eliminate. Something you think. Something you feel. Loneliness, self-doubt, fear, despair, hopelessness. Any of these can be options. Okay. So, we're almost done with the introduction to the meditation. Okay. So, I'm just looking, see if I missed anything in my notes here. Please remember that where I began this conversation, which is that we are both being and becoming. We're both being and becoming. And it's to bring these things, two things into alignment. Being is unchanging, so that's not going anywhere. Rather, it's becoming informed by and guided by being, bringing the mind into alignment with the heart. The mind is intellect and learning, and it's always changing. The heart remains this field of unsurpassed self-awareness, self-beingness. It's whole, it's the essential self, knowing itself. And so how would my decisions, how would my life, how would my relationships, what would they be, how would they be, what would they reflect if I were to be aligned with that self-knowing that's already complete, and that nothing in the world can make less complete or more complete? It's complete, it's absolute. Okay, so just going to give you a few moments if you want to get up, stretch a little bit, and we're going to move into this meditation. So most of the work we've done so far is it's kind of what we would describe as V yoga. And V yoga is this idea of kind of learning, the stuff we want to separate from. This is the yoga of separation, of making distinctions, of beginning this process of consciously separating ourselves from what's no longer constructive, which is much as part of yoga as this other thing that we know about, which is the bringing together of two things, but that's bringing my being with becoming, myself with universal awareness, my experience of what is temporal to my experience of what is eternal. So primarily it's V-yoga that we've done so far. So now in the meditation, we're going to turn to Samyoga, but just a couple of introductory points. Number one, in the work that we'll do in this meditation, the heart is described as the place, Vrikshakalpa means tree, literally wishing tree. In this case, kalpa means wishing, and vriksha means tree, so the wishing tree. And the idea here is what is taught is that when we bring desires and we place them at the root of this tree, they bear the fruit. That is the fulfillment of those desires. So the wishing tree, where we plant our desires, is here in the heart. We should also understand, though, that there is karma, which means that the stuff that keeps us, our own stuff, I'm not talking about the world, that's another conversation, but our own stuff that keeps us from moving in that direction with full conviction, full force, is real, and that has power. And so it's important that we understand that there's more than just making a wish, because there is in fact energy, patterning, we can think of that as energy. There's history of that will influence, diminish our capacity to fulfill those intentions. The power that we have within our own system to fulfill the wishes that we place in the heart is in the abdominal center. And I could pop up here, solar plexus to pubic bone, more or less, somewhere in there. So that's the power center. It's also the place of self-nurturance, of potency, of capacity, somewhat of which despite my body needing to go to sleep, we're having this conversation. Part of my capacity to do so is coming from my navel center, if you will. So just as important as knowing how to plant your heart, seeds in your heart, is this relationship to the power to overcome the resistance and the lethargy and the inertia and the power of our patterning, the power of our vasanas, the history and the pattern and the tendency that we have to fulfill and keep returning to that history. That power to set you free is not heart-based. It's actually navel-based. And then there's one other really vital element to this equation, this formula of moving from resolution and intention to fulfillment, to actualization. And that is that once the seed of the desire is planted, what moves us in that direction? If we are to actually fulfill these intentions, we will spontaneously need to be moved by. Once we're in, so now we have this desire formed in the, it's established in the heart, but now what moves us in the right way, at the right time, in the right measure? There's something leading us potentially, and that vision, that impulse, that storehouse of spontaneity informed by the planted desire in the heart that moves us in that direction is your third eye center. So we understand there's a real kind of, it's not a hierarchy, it's an alchemy. Alchemy, navel center, heart center, third eye center. Power, desire, the intuitive guiding force, informed by the desire, activated by this power. That's what moves us in the direction of the fulfillment of it. The alchemy of all three, okay? So that's what this meditation is dedicated to. So, you ready?